I fell asleep serving the Mafia boss. I never expected to wake in his bed beside him. The tray was still in my hands when the room began to tilt. I remember the sound of the porcelain cup sliding, the soft ring of silver against silver, and the way Adrian Moretti's eyes met mine across the desk with something close to recognition. He knew. He knew before I did that we were not going to stay awake. My knees folded first, then his shoulders slumped forward, and the last thing I saw was the small red light of a camera blinking from the top of a bookshelf that had no camera on it an hour ago. When I opened my eyes again, I was not on the study floor. I was in a bed that smelled like cedar and gun oil. My apron was gone, and the feared Mafia boss of the East Coast was lying beside me with his shirt unbuttoned and his hand resting, unconscious, against the small of my back. If you are the kind of person who needs to know how a story ends before you can breathe again, stay with me. Because before the sun came up, I served that same coffee to the man who tried to kill us. And he drank it. My name is Mara Quinn. I am 34 years old, and 6 months ago I could not have imagined saying any of that out loud. I had spent most of my adult life pushing a stretcher into the back of an ambulance, and after a shoulder injury took that away from me, I had spent the last 2 years balancing catering trays for people who did not remember my face between courses. That is what I was doing the night I was hired to serve a private dinner at the Moretti estate. The agency called it a closed guest list. They said the pay was $3,000 for one shift, cash, and the only rule was that I was not to look directly at the host unless he spoke to me first. I needed the money. My little food service company had 2 months of rent left in the account, and a walk-in cooler that had started making a sound I could not afford to fix. I said yes before I let myself think about who the host might be. The estate sat at the end of a private road that curved through a stand of black pines. And the first thing I noticed, walking up the service drive with my uniform bag over my shoulder, was how quiet it was. No dogs, no radios, no sound from the road behind me the second the front gate closed. 2 men in dark suits stood at the kitchen door, and one of them checked my ID against a printed list, then checked my face against a photograph I had never given anyone. He did not smile. He did not say hello. He held the door open just wide enough for me to step through sideways and said, "You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not enter the West Wing. You do not carry a phone." Then he took mine and put it in a small metal box with 6 others. He wrote my name on a piece of masking tape and stuck it to the lid. I remember thinking that was the most careful thing anyone had done for me all week, and that I did not like the reason for it. I had told my brother before I drove up that if I did not text him by 2 in the morning, he should call the number of the agency and ask if I had left the property. He had laughed at me and said I was being dramatic. I had laughed back and told him he was probably right. Then I had driven up the private road anyway because $3,000 was $3,000. And the walk-in cooler at my shop had started to hum in a way that meant a compressor, and a compressor meant a month I could not miss. Inside, the kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter and something sharper underneath, the way a house smells when the people inside it are used to hiding things. The head chef, a woman named Rosa DeLuca, was 62 years old, older than my mother would have been, and she wore her gray hair pinned up with a pencil. She looked at me for a long time before she handed me my black service jacket. "You keep your eyes down and your hands steady," she said. "The men in this house measure a stranger by how long it takes her to notice she is being measured." I told her I understood. She said, "No, you don't, but you will." She turned back to the stove. Then, without looking at me, she added, "And if a man in this house asks you your last name, give him a different one. It does not matter which. Just not yours." I asked her why. She said, "Because a first name is a person, a last name is a family. And in this house, a family is a list of people who can be reached." Adrian Moretti came into the kitchen at 7 o'clock exactly. He was 51, taller than I expected, and he moved through a room the way weather moves through a valley, slow and inevitable. Every other server dropped their eyes. I dropped mine too, but only for a moment. And when I looked up again, he was looking directly at me. I did not flinch. I said, "Good evening, sir," in the same voice I used for every private client, and I saw something register in his face, a small pause, as if a chair he expected to be empty had someone sitting in it. He nodded once and walked past me into the dining room. Behind him, one of his men, a broad-shouldered guard named Paulie, glanced at me the way a man glances at a chair he plans to move later. I filed the look away without letting it show on my face. Rosa saw me file it. Rosa saw everything. If any part of you is already asking whether a man like that could be worth listening to, do me one small favor before I go on. Tap the like button and follow the channel, because what happened in the next 4 hours will not make sense unless you hear all of it. And I promise you the ending is not the one you are imagining. Now let me tell you about the dinner. There were 7 men at the table. Adrian at the head, 3 older captains on his right, 2 lawyers on his left, and at the far end, closest to the door, a younger man in a charcoal suit with the same dark eyes as Adrian, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of the same stone, but softer, less finished. That was Nico Moretti, 30 years old, Adrian's nephew, and, as I would learn before the night was over, the boy Adrian had raised as his own son since Nico was 12. Nico smiled at the servers. He asked one of them her name and thanked her when she poured his wine. He asked another about her children. He remembered a birthday. He was the only person in the room who behaved the way a person is supposed to behave. That should have been the first thing I noticed. It was not. Kindness in a house like that one, I would understand later, is almost always a receipt someone is planning to cash. The first thing I noticed was that Adrian did not like being watched. He kept glancing at the mirrored panel behind the sideboard, and every time a server lingered near his shoulder to refill his glass, his jaw tightened by a fraction. So I refilled his glass from the far side and stepped back before he had to look at me. The second time I did it, he set his fork down for half a second and looked at me again, and I understood that the difference between being invisible and being seen was smaller than I had ever been taught. Between the second and third course, Adrian tapped his knife against the rim of his glass, and the room fell silent so quickly it felt like a door closing. By the end of this year, he said, every dollar this family earns will come from the shipping company. The old work is finished. The old ledgers will be burned in front of witnesses. Anyone who cannot accept that has until Sunday to say so. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I saw one of the older captains close his eyes for a long moment. I saw a lawyer press his thumb into the tablecloth, and I saw Nico, at the far end of the table, smile a smile that did not touch his eyes, and lift his wineglass and say, "To the new family, Uncle." Adrian nodded at him. Nico drank, and somewhere in the small, careful stillness of Nico's shoulders, I felt a wrongness settle into the room like cold air under a door. The guests left before midnight. Rosa sent most of the staff home in a black van at 12:30, but she pulled me aside in the pantry and said Mr. Moretti wanted one more coffee brought to his study, and she wanted me to do it because I had the least clumsy hands in the kitchen. She did not smile when she said it. She pressed a small brass key into my palm and told me the study door would be locked from the inside, and I should knock twice and wait. Then she said quietly, "If you smell anything sweet in that hallway, do not go in. Come back to me first." I asked her what she meant. She did not answer. She only turned back to the sink and began washing a copper pot that was already clean. On her way past me, she said, almost too low to hear, "There is a panel behind the fireplace in the study. If tonight goes wrong, press it." I asked her how tonight could go wrong. She said, "It always can. That is what tonight means." I carried the tray down the long hallway toward the study. I did not smell anything sweet. I smelled cedar polish and old paper and, faintly, the leather of the chair Adrian was sitting in when he opened the door for me. He had loosened his tie. He looked tired in a way that money cannot fix. He gestured to the desk and said, "Set it down, then sit." I told him I was not permitted to sit. He said, "Tonight you are." So I sat, on the edge of a leather chair across from him, my hands folded in my lap, and I watched him pour his own coffee for the first time all evening. He drank half of it in one swallow, the way tired men do, and then he looked at me over the rim of the cup and said, "You did not flinch when I walked into the kitchen. Why?" I told him the truth. I told him I had spent 9 years as an emergency medical technician, and the only people who scared me anymore were the ones who did not know they were dangerous. He set the cup down. He did not smile, but the corner of his mouth moved. He said, "Then you and I understand each other." And that was the last full sentence I heard him speak before the room began to slide. I want to tell you I fought it. I want to tell you I recognized the taste of the sedative on the coffee I had not yet touched, that I lunged for the door, that I saved him. I did not. My hands went numb first, then my mouth, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that this was not exhaustion, because exhaustion does not turn the edges of your vision blue. I remember Adrian pushing himself up from his chair and reaching under the desk for something, a weapon, a button. I never found out which, and I remember his knees buckling before his fingers could close on it. I remember the small red light on the bookshelf, and I remember the sound of a door I could not see opening somewhere behind me. Then nothing. When I woke up, the first thing I understood was that I was warm, and warmth in a strange place is always the beginning of something worse. I was under a heavy duvet. My uniform blouse was still buttoned, but my apron was gone, and my hair, which I had pinned up at 6 o'clock, was loose around my shoulders, as if someone had taken the pins out one by one. Beside me, Adrian Moretti was unconscious on his back, his shirt open to the third button, his left hand resting against my hip in a way that would look, in a photograph, like tenderness. Across the room, on a low dresser, a small digital camera sat on a tripod with its red light burning steady. And under the door, curling in like fog on a lake, I could see the faint shimmer of air where air should not be shimmering. I sat up too fast, and the world went sideways, and I understood 3 things at once, in the order an EMT understands them. First, we had been sedated, not drunk, because my pupils were not tracking the light the way alcohol makes them track. Second, the shimmer under the door was not fog. It was heat distortion from a gas leak, and the sweet smell Rosa had warned me about was already in the room, faint, but climbing. Third, we had less time than it takes to boil an egg before that gas would put us to sleep in a way we would not wake up from. I shook Adrian. He did not wake. I slapped him, hard enough that my palms stung, and his eyes opened halfway and closed again. So I did what I had done 100 times in the back of an ambulance. I got behind him, hooked my arms under his, and dragged him off the bed onto the floor, because the gas was heavier at ceiling height in this room, and the air near the baseboards was cleaner. Then I crawled to the window, wrapped the corner of the duvet around my fist, and drove it through the glass. The alarm did not go off. That was the 4th thing I understood, and it was the worst one. Someone had turned the alarm off from inside the house. If you are still with me, and your heart is beating a little faster than it was 2 minutes ago, please leave a comment and tell me one word. Tell me who you think turned off that alarm, because I did not know yet. And the answer is going to hurt. Cold air rushed in through the broken window, and Adrian coughed himself awake on the floor beside me. His eyes found mine before they found anything else in the room, and I watched him do the math I had already done, faster than most men would have, and land on the same answer. He looked at the camera. He looked at his open shirt. He looked at me, and for one long, terrible second, I saw him consider the possibility that I had done this. His hand moved, without him meaning it to, toward the drawer of the nightstand, and I said, very quietly, "If you open that drawer, I am going to assume you did this to me, and I am going to jump out that window and take my chances on the lawn." He stopped. He looked at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. And then he said, in a voice I would remember for the rest of my life, "The coffee. Neither of us drank enough for this. It was in the water pitcher, too." I nodded. I said, "Someone is trying to kill you, Mr. Moretti, and they wanted the world to think I did it in bed." He did not argue. He got to his knees, then to his feet, holding the edge of the nightstand for balance, and he walked to the camera on the tripod and turned it around. There was a small screen on the back, and on the screen, in a folder marked with tonight's date, there were 17 photographs. In every single one of them, I was in his bed, my hair loose, his hands somewhere on my body, both of us with our eyes closed. In 3 of them, my blouse was unbuttoned to the second button. It was not unbuttoned now. Someone had done it, taken the picture, and buttoned it back up. The care of that gesture was the thing that finally made me sit down on the floor and shake. Adrian looked at the screen for a long time. Then he said without turning around, "These have already been sent." He tapped the corner of the screen. A small icon showed that the folder had been uploaded at 2:14 in the morning to 7 separate email addresses. "My counsel," he said, "every senior man in this family has already seen these pictures, and whoever sent them told them I am dead, and you are the woman who did it." I asked him how he knew what the message said. He said, "Because if I were the one doing this, that is the message I would send." We had, by his estimate, less than an hour before the council would arrive at the estate to confirm his death and elevate the next boss. The gas was still coming in under the door. We could not leave through the door, and the only thing keeping me from complete panic was the fact that Rosa DeLuca had told me, 6 hours earlier, not to smell anything sweet in that hallway. Rosa had known. Not that this would happen tonight, maybe, but that it could happen. And Rosa, I realized, had a key ring on her belt with more keys than any housekeeper should have needed. I told Adrian about Rosa. He closed his eyes for one full breath, and I saw the calculation move across his face. And he said, "Rosa raised me. If Rosa wanted me dead, I would have been dead at 19. Then he crossed to the wall beside the fireplace, pressed his palm flat against a panel of dark wood, and slid it sideways. Behind it was a narrow servant's passage, unlit, smelling of dust and cold stone. He said, "Follow me. Stay close. Do not touch the walls. There are wires in some of them." I followed him. The passage ran along the spine of the house, behind every important room, and Adrian moved through it like a man walking through his own memory. We came out in the pantry off the kitchen, and Rosa was already there, sitting on a stool with her hands folded on her lap, waiting. She looked up when the panel slid open. She did not look surprised. She looked, if anything, relieved. She said, "I heard the window break. I have been counting the seconds since." And then she started to cry, quietly, without moving her hands. She told us everything in the time it took the kettle to boil. Nico had changed the staffing sheet 3 days ago, replacing a regular server with a temporary one from an agency he had never used before. That was me. He had specifically requested a woman under 40 who worked catering jobs alone, without a partner or a roommate who would ask questions if she did not come home. He had ordered a new coffee service for tonight, the specific cup selected by him. He had told Rosa to send the rest of the staff home early, and he had told the night security team to take a 2-hour break at midnight because Uncle wanted privacy. Rosa had not questioned any of it because Nico was the heir, and the heir's orders were Adrian's orders. Until they weren't. Adrian sat down on the pantry floor. That is what I remember most clearly about that moment. Not what he said, because he did not say anything for almost a minute. He just sat down on the cold tile floor with his back against the shelving, and he put his face in his hands, and he breathed the way men breathe when they are trying not to make a sound. Rosa reached out and touched the top of his head, once, the way you touch a child. And I understood suddenly that the story I was inside was not a story about a mafia boss and a maid. It was a story about a man learning, at 51 years old, that the boy he raised had wanted him dead since the boy was old enough to want anything at all. I gave him 30 seconds. Then I said, "Mr. Moretti, we do not have time for this. Your counsel is going to be at the front door in 40 minutes. He looked up at me. His eyes were red but dry. He said, "Call me Adrian." I told him a plan. It was a bad plan, and I knew it was a bad plan. But it was the only plan that used the one advantage we had, which was that Nico did not know we were alive. I told Adrian I would go back through the passage, put my apron back on, walk into the breakfast hall through the servant's door as if nothing had happened, and serve Nico the same coffee service he had used to poison us. I would set the same distinctive cup, the one with the small chip on the handle that I had noticed at 7 o'clock, directly in front of him. And I would say, in front of every senior man in that family, that the police were on their way to collect it because someone had reported finding his fingerprint under the handle. Adrian said, "He wore gloves." I said, "I know. That is the point. If he wore gloves, he will say so, and he will only know he wore gloves if he was the one who prepared the cup." Adrian was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "And where will I be while you do this?" I told him. He did not like it. But he agreed, because we had run out of ways not to. Rosa unlocked a small closet behind the pantry and gave me a fresh apron. She fixed my hair with the same pins I had worn earlier, and she wiped a smudge of soot from my cheek with the corner of her thumb, and she said, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, "If he asks you where the boss is, tell him you saw the boss die. Say it plain. Do not decorate it. Men like Nico believe simple things." Then she gave me the tray. On it were 7 cups, 6 of them ordinary, and one, in the center, with a hairline chip on the handle. I carried it up the back stairs. The breakfast hall was full. All 6 of Adrian's senior captains and both lawyers were seated at the long table, and at the head of the table, in Adrian's chair, sat Nico. He was wearing a black tie. He had already put himself in mourning. When the door opened and I stepped in with the tray, every head in the room turned, and the silence that fell was the kind that follows a gunshot. Nico stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He said, You were supposed to be dead." I did not answer him right away. I set the tray on the sideboard. I began pouring the coffee the way I had been trained to pour it, from the right, 1 cup at a time. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I said without looking up, "I ran. I heard him fall and I ran. I did not know what to do." I let my voice break on the last word, just a little. The way an EMT knows how to let a voice break to sell a story to a stranger. And I set the chipped cup in front of Nico and I said, "The police are already on their way. They found a print under the handle of the cup he drank from. They wanted me to keep it here until they arrive." Nico looked at the cup. He looked at me. And then, God help him, he laughed. It was a small laugh, more breath than sound. And he said, "That's impossible. I wore gloves." The room did not react at first. It took 2 full seconds for the words to settle. I watched the oldest captain, a man named Vincent, close his eyes exactly the way he had closed them at the dinner table when Adrian announced the shipping company. I watched a lawyer's hand freeze halfway to his coffee. I watched Nico realize in real time that he had just spoken his own confession out loud in front of every man whose loyalty he had spent a decade trying to inherit. He tried to fix it. He said, "I mean, if I had prepared a cup, I would have worn gloves. I always wear gloves in the kitchen." But it was too late. The room had already tilted. And then the door at the far end of the breakfast hall opened, and Adrian Moretti walked in. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He walked to the head of the table, stopped behind his own chair, and put one hand on the back of it. He looked at Nico for a long time before he spoke. He said, "You told me at the dinner table tonight in front of these men that you would drink to the new family. I watched you drink. I watched you smile at me. And then you went upstairs and turned a camera on a woman you had never met and left her to die in my bed so that this family would think I was the kind of man who dies that way." He paused. He said, "Say something, Nico. Say anything. But do not lie to me again." Nico's hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. Rosa had been standing behind me, holding a folded coat over her arm, and I had not noticed her come up. She stepped forward now and set the coat gently on the sideboard. From the inside pocket of the coat, she took a small, matte black pistol and set it beside the coat, out of reach. She said without looking at Nico, "I collected this when you came in. I was going to give it back at breakfast." Nico stared at her. He said, "Rosa." She said, "I raised him too, Nico, and I know the difference." Vincent, the old captain, stood up slowly. He looked at Adrian. He looked at Nico. He looked at the chipped cup on the table in front of Nico, and at the coffee inside it that Nico had not touched. And then he looked at me, a temporary server, standing beside a sideboard in a house I had walked into 10 hours earlier. And he said, to the room, "The boss is alive. The heir has confessed. This matter is closed." He sat back down. One by one, the other men at the table did the same. Nico did not sit. He stood in the middle of the breakfast hall with his hands open at his sides, and he looked at Adrian, and he said, "I did it because you are killing us. You are making us farmers. You are making us bookkeepers. My father did not die so his brother could turn our name into a shipping label. Every man at this table used to be feared. Now they are going to be audited." Adrian listened. He listened all the way through. He did not interrupt. When Nico was done, Adrian said quietly, "Your father died because he trusted the wrong man. I have spent 30 years trying to make sure no one in this family ever has to do that again. You were supposed to run the shipping company. I named you last week. The papers are in my safe. You would have had everything I built. You did not need to take it. You needed to wait. 6 days. That is how long you needed to wait to inherit legally what you tried to take by putting a stranger in my bed." Nico's face changed then. It was the smallest change, a single crack running through a pane of glass. And I understood that he had not known. He had believed all this time that Adrian was going to give the empire to someone else, or dissolve it before it reached him. He had killed for something that was already his. He sat down in the chair at the far end of the table, the same chair he had sat in at dinner, and he put his forehead against the wood, and for the first time since I had walked into that house, I saw him look his real age, which was younger than mine, and lonelier than any of us had been paying attention to. Adrian did not kill him. I want you to understand that because it is the part of the night I think about most often. Adrian did not kill him. He turned him over that same morning to an allied family 2 states away, under the condition that Nico would live out the rest of his life on a farm they owned, working the land, without ever again holding a phone, a weapon, or a name that could reach anyone in this city. Adrian said in front of the council, "The old way would have put a bullet in him at this table. The new way sends him where he can do no more harm. That is the difference between what we were and what we are going to be. If any man here cannot live with that difference, the door is behind you." No one moved. Then Adrian looked at me, in front of all of them, and he said, "This woman saved my life tonight with a coffee cup and a lie. She is not a servant in this house. She is not a witness to be paid off. She is an employee of the legitimate hospitality company we are opening this spring, and she will run it if she wants to." He said it the way a man reads a will, without softness, without pressure, just a fact placed on a table. I did not answer him then. I could not. I set the coffee pot back on the tray, and I walked out of the breakfast hall on legs that did not entirely belong to me, and I sat on the back step of the kitchen, and I watched the sun come up over the black pines. Rosa brought me a blanket. She sat beside me without speaking. After a long time, she said, "He meant it, you know, the offer. He does not say things like that twice." I told her I knew. She said, "Then take a week, then answer him." She paused. She said, "And do not answer out of pity. He would rather you say no than say yes for the wrong reason. That is the one thing about him that has never changed." I took a week. I did not spend it thinking about him. I spent it thinking about the girl I had been at 22, pushing a stretcher up a set of concrete stairs at 3 in the morning, and about the woman I had been at 32, carrying a tray of crab cakes through a room full of men who did not remember my face. I spent it asking whether the woman I was now, the one who had put a chipped coffee cup in front of a killer and made him confess by daylight, was someone I could keep being if I stayed. I decided she was. I answered him. I said yes, in writing, with a contract my own lawyer drew up, with terms that made me an executive of the hospitality company rather than a member of his household. He signed it without changing a single line. 2 months later, the shipping company opened. 4 months later, the hospitality company followed. The old ledgers were burned in a fireplace in the main dining room, in front of 6 witnesses, exactly as Adrian had promised at dinner. I was one of the witnesses. Rosa was another. Vincent, the old captain who had stood up first in the breakfast hall, was the third. He caught my eye across the fire and nodded, once, the way a man nods at another man who has earned the right to be standing where she is standing. Now, before I tell you the last part, do me one small kindness. If any of this story has meant anything to you, if you have ever been the invisible person in a room full of powerful men, subscribe to the channel and stay for the ending. Because the ending is not what you think it is, and it is the only part of the night that was mine to choose. 6 months after the coup, on a Thursday evening in October, Adrian and I stayed late in his study going over the fall bookings for the hospitality company. It was almost midnight when we finished. He stood up. He walked me to the door. He did not touch me. He never had. I stopped in the doorway and I looked back at him and I said, "Adrian, the first time I woke up in your bed, I did not know how I got there." He said quietly, "I know." I said, "Tonight I would like to know." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. I took it, and I walked with him, on my own 2 feet, down the hallway I had been dragged down 6 months earlier while unconscious, and I stepped into the room I had once broken a window to escape. The window had been replaced. The camera was gone. The bed was made. I sat down on the edge of it. He sat down beside me. I said, "The last time I was in this room, someone was trying to destroy us. This time, no one put me here except me." He did not answer with a speech. He turned toward me, and he put his hand against my cheek, the same hand that had rested against my hip that first terrible morning. And this time, when it touched me, I was awake for it. I chose it. He kissed me once, carefully, the way a man kisses a woman he has been waiting a long time to be permitted to kiss. I stayed. Not because he asked. He did not ask. I stayed because for the first time in my life, I had walked into a powerful man's room as someone he could not command, could not photograph, could not use. I stayed because the woman who had been dragged into that bed unconscious was not the same woman sitting on the edge of it now, and the difference between those two women was the whole point of what we had survived. In the morning, I made the coffee myself. I brought 2 cups into the study, and I set them down on the desk, and I sat across from him in the same chair I had sat in the night we were poisoned. He looked at the cups. He looked at me. He said, "You could have handed me one." I said, "I know, but I wanted you to pick." He picked. I picked the other. We drank. Nothing happened. That was the point. If you have made it all the way to the end of this story, tell me one thing in the comments. Tell me whether you think I was brave the second time I walked into that room, or whether you think I was reckless. I have my own answer, but I want yours, because this channel is built on the people who stay for the ending, and this ending was earned by every one of you who did not click away when the camera light came on. Subscribe if you have not, so the next story finds you. My name is Mara Quinn. I fell asleep serving the Mafia boss. I woke up in his bed beside him. And 6 months later, on a Thursday night in October, I walked into that room again, on my own, with both eyes open, and I chose the man the world had told me to be afraid of. He was afraid of me too by then. That is the part no one tells you about powerful men. The moment they choose you back, they are more frightened than you are. And the only way any of it works in the end is if neither of you looks away first. Neither of us did.